I thank Dr. Pachauri and TERI for inviting me back to Delhi. Last November, I gave a presentation in Montreal at the Royal Bank of Canada to a group of women investors called the Women Investors for Impact. And these women were interested in not only achieving a financial return, which still is a key element in their decision process, but also in maximizing the social and environmental impact of these investments. And some of you might think that this is wishful thinking, but the Royal Bank of Canada has set up a fund called the RBC Impact Fund with $20 million. And so it's taking this approach of these women investors and of their focus on, in fact, gender aspects of the investment process very seriously. Now, as you can imagine, I was there to talk about Green Cross, but questions of gender have actually dominated most of the agenda. And a number of aspects that have been discussed during the last few days, including the fact that the 85 richest people in the world have more or less as much as the 3.5 billion poorest. What is rarely said is that, in fact, the 85 richest are mostly men, and the poorest are predominantly women. And this, despite the fact that most of the work around the world is done, or actually a greater percentage of the work done around the world is actually done by women. According to the World Bank, women often work up to 18 hours a day, whereas men customarily work 8 hours. The difference is that most of the income is received by men and very little for women, because a lot of that work is in fact not remunerated. And when it is, it's often at a much lower level. Interestingly, rich men and poor men alike in rich countries and poorer countries are actually responsible for most of the environmental impact. Most of the energy use is used by men, most of the pollution is caused by men, and most of the climate change results from activities of men. And that's very interesting because data around CO2 emissions is widely available for rich countries, poor countries, north, south, but there's very little in terms of gender information on CO2 emissions, and that is something that we should probably look into. But now let me talk about ability or participation in decision-making. And this, of course, is recognized as a key element in gender equality and the ability to address gender questions. Now, in the United States, men hold 83% of the seats in Congress. 88% of the governors are men as well. And over 80% of state legislators are men. So, except perhaps in Bhutan, but far and wide, it's men making decisions for all. And usually that means that gender issues and women issues are not properly taken into account. Now, let's take one example that was heard this week. The cook stove projects that were where the benefits to society, the benefits to communities seemed to be very evident to everyone. Yet it was the men that were the biggest roadblock, and convincing the men was the biggest roadblock in order for the project to move forward. And this is what we see around the world. In Asia, where there's tremendous growth in cities, there is going to be massive investment in the coming years into the transportation system. And yet, in terms of women who are involved in making these decisions and in women who are professionally trained in transportation systems and mobility, well, in fact, they represent a very small portion of the people involved. Mostly, it's men taking these decisions. So how will women aspects or gender aspects be taken into account in the mass transportation systems? It's going to be very difficult. Let's take the example of Dhaka, where you have a city of 15 million people with a very poorly developed bus system. Well, it's very difficult for women to get onto these buses. When they are being pushed around, they are being aggressed. And most of the bus drivers actually would prefer not picking them up because they say they take longer to get on and off the bus, and hence they reduce profitability for the bus company. And when they do take women on, they charge excess rates and pocket the difference between the official fare. And so tell me, how will we take this into account unless women and gender questions, and unless women are involved in these decisions, and unless gender questions are taken into account? Now, at Green Cross, we have focused on one very specific area, which is the access to water and sanitation. And this is particularly important for women because of the people who suffer from the global water crisis, and that is expected to become worse and worse as years go by. Well, a disproportionate part of the suffering is borne by women. And so at Green Cross, we implement access to water and sanitation projects around the world, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. We put in place rainwater harvesting systems, we put in place wells, boreholes, ecological latrines, and separate latrines for boys and girls. And what has been the result of these projects? Well, women no longer have to walk for hours and hours to go and fetch the water, and hence they are safer, they are no longer attacked as they walk the countryside. The prevalence of waterborne diseases, which benefits not only men, but the entire communities, is down by over 90%. Women not only have more time to engage in economic activity, they are able to earn a livelihood, so they no longer depend on the men in the household for that part. And girls, the importance of separate latrines for boys and girls. So when the girls no longer have to fetch water, they can go to school, and the ability to have separate latrines has increased in some of our projects, the attendance by girls by over 50%. So dramatic improvements throughout society, and a huge multiplier effect, because what we do is we bring water and sanitation, the entire community benefits, and that has also an impact in terms of livelihoods, income, and the ability of women to actually participate in the decisions. In fact, on the project committees in all of our projects, the majority of the members are women. There's a minimum of 5 people on these committees, and 3 of them have to be women by rule. So let me conclude by saying that just as much as the women investors were interested in addressing gender issues, because they see this not as a charitable aspect, but as a way to improve the returns, not only in benefit of the women involved, but also in the benefit of the community as a whole. And so, in closing, I'd like to invite TERI, Dr. Pachari and TERI, and I hope that in the near future we'll be able to develop such projects in collaboration between Green Cross and TERI in India. Thank you very much.